What if the very relationship you're holding on to is the one thing standing between you and God's best for your life? You've prayed, you've hoped, you've even convinced yourself that this connection must be from God, but deep down, something feels off. Maybe it's the constant unrest in your spirit or the way your faith feels weaker instead of stronger. What if God has been speaking all along, but you're missing the signs? Too often, people stay in relationships that slowly chip away at their peace, values, and spiritual growth, all while wondering why they feel so distant from God. It's not because He's silent, it's because He's protecting you from a path that could derail your destiny. But how do you know when it's not just a rough patch, but God's way of saying, this isn't where you're meant to be? Today, we're going to break down the unmistakable signs that reveal when God does not want you to be with someone. These aren't vague feelings or guesses. They're biblical principles rooted in clarity, peace, and purpose. And by the end, you'll have the spiritual insight to recognize His voice more clearly than ever before. But be warned, what you're about to learn might challenge everything you've believed about relationships and God's plan. Are you ready to uncover the truth and finally find the freedom God has been leading you toward when God does not want you to be with someone? One of the first signs is a persistent loss of inner peace. That subtle sense of unease lingers. No matter how much you try to justify the relationship in your mind, you might feel constantly restless, as if something just doesn't sit right in your spirit. Philippians 4:7 speaks of God's peace as something that transcends all understanding. When it's missing, that's worth paying attention to. True peace isn't just the absence of conflict, but a deep, unshakable calm that aligns with God's presence. Imagine feeling torn every time you're around someone, like your heart is whispering, this isn't where you're supposed to be. Maybe you've experienced that before, staying up at night, replaying conversations, sensing a disconnection from your values. That kind of inner tension often reflects a spiritual warning. God's peace brings clarity, not confusion. When God does not want you to be with someone, this inner disturbance can be His way of redirecting you to something better. A practical way to discern this is through personal reflection and prayer journaling. Write down moments when you feel most at peace and compare them to how you feel around this person. If your quiet moments with God feel distant or clouded, it's worth asking why. Seeking counsel from spiritually mature friends can also reveal blind spots you might be missing. God's voice often speaks through the discomfort we ignore, gently nudging us back to His path. But here's the thing, that discomfort isn't punishment, it's protection. God's plan is never to leave you in a state of inner turmoil, but to draw you closer to His perfect will. When God does not want you to be with someone, He often stirs this feeling to prevent you from settling for less than His best. And this is just the beginning, because understanding His will also involves the values you share with someone. When God does not want you to be with someone, a major sign can be a clash in core values. You may start noticing subtle tensions. Conversations that once felt natural now spark debates over beliefs, life goals, or even how faith should shape your lives. 2 Corinthians 6:14 warns against being unequally yoked, emphasizing the risk of spiritual misalignment. This isn't about minor differences, but foundational convictions that affect your life's direction. When your values pull in opposite directions, it becomes nearly impossible to walk together in harmony. Think about it. If one person prioritizes faith while the other downplays spiritual growth, how can the relationship thrive? Imagine trying to build a home where one partner wants a strong foundation while the other skips critical steps. Sooner or later, cracks appear. If you're constantly justifying compromise on key beliefs, it could be a sign God's redirecting you. Living with divided values can slowly erode your spiritual confidence and create confusion. This kind of misalignment often shows up in subtle ways. Maybe you feel pressured to downplay your faith in social settings or silence convictions that once guided you. Practical wisdom here. Pay attention to how you feel after important conversations. Do you feel encouraged or like you've betrayed your own principles? When God does not want you to be with someone, He often allows these conflicts to rise, not to harm you, but to protect your spiritual integrity. And here's the truth. God never calls you into relationships that require you to sacrifice your faith identity. When values clash, they reveal a deeper truth. God may be preserving you for someone whose heart aligns with His purpose for your life. But there's more to recognize. It's not just about values. The fruits a relationship produces also speak volumes about its alignment with God's plan. When God does not want you to be with someone, the relationship's spiritual fruits often reveal the truth. Jesus teaches in Matthew 7:16, "By their fruits you will recognize them." Healthy relationships cultivate joy, peace, patience, and growth, while those outside God's will often bear negative fruits, spiritual confusion, distance from God, or emotional turmoil. It's not just about how a relationship feels, but the long-term impact it has on your spiritual walk. If it drains you spiritually rather than uplifting you, it's a sign worth noting. Picture a tree that looks healthy on the outside but produces bitter fruit. A relationship can appear promising, fun, exciting, even passionate, yet leave you feeling spiritually starved over time. Maybe you've noticed your prayer life slipping, your faith taking a back seat, or a growing sense of guilt for compromising biblical values. When God does not want you to be with someone, the spiritual decay often becomes more evident the longer you remain in that relationship. Consider the fruits of encouragement, accountability, and shared spiritual growth. Does this person challenge you to become stronger in your faith, or are you constantly compromising your convictions? A practical step is to reflect on the spiritual habits you had before and after entering the relationship. If you've drifted from personal devotions, lost touch with godly friends, or started ignoring your spiritual convictions, those signs shouldn't be dismissed lightly. God doesn't just call you to relationships for personal happiness. He desires partnerships that refine, sharpen, and glorify Him. When God does not want you to be with someone, the relationship often stunts spiritual progress rather than nurturing it. But spiritual stagnation is just one layer. What happens when your relationship actually begins pulling you away from God entirely, limiting your personal growth? When God does not want you to be with someone, your spiritual growth often takes a noticeable hit. What once felt like a thriving connection with God begins to feel distant. You may find yourself skipping prayer, neglecting personal Bible study, or even feeling disconnected during worship. This decline isn't always dramatic. It often creeps in slowly as small compromises pile up. But when a relationship draws you away from God instead of inspiring spiritual closeness, it's a sign worth paying attention to. Think about it like this. Imagine a flame that once burned brightly but now flickers, struggling for air. If the relationship you're in dampens your desire to seek God rather than fueling it, that's a clear warning sign. Maybe you once prayed together, but now faith-based conversations feel awkward or even avoided. Or perhaps you've started making excuses for behaviors that contradict biblical principles. When God does not want you to be with someone, that gradual spiritual decline often signals He's redirecting you toward a healthier path. Practical steps. Start by asking yourself, is this relationship drawing me closer to God's purpose or distracting me from it? Try journaling your faith journey. Write down the ways your spiritual habits have shifted since being with this person. Another wise step. Reconnect with spiritual mentors who can help you discern whether the decline is relational or personal. When God does not want you to be with someone, He often uses this discomfort as a protective measure, calling you back to Him. But God's guidance isn't just about personal spiritual health. It also involves the bigger picture of your life's purpose. If a relationship hinders the calling God has placed on your life, it may be time to reflect on whether this connection truly aligns with His plans. And speaking of purpose, have you ever wondered how much a relationship can impact your God-given mission? When God does not want you to be with someone, it often becomes evident through a clash with your divine purpose. Jeremiah 29:11 reminds us that God has a specific plan for each life, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Yet some relationships seem to derail those plans, leaving you feeling spiritually stagnant or even off course. If you're constantly sacrificing your dreams, delaying personal growth, or compromising the mission God placed on your heart, it could be a sign you're with someone outside His will. Picture a runner in a relay race being held back by a teammate who refuses to pass the baton. Maybe God has called you to step into ministry, start a faith-based business, or simply grow in a new season of life. But the relationship feels like a constant weight, slowing your momentum. If the person you're with can't support or encourage the calling on your life, it raises a serious question. Are they meant to be part of your God-ordained journey? When God does not want you to be with someone, it's often because they can't walk in alignment with the assignment He's given you. A practical way to assess this is to reflect on how the relationship affects your purpose-driven goals. Ask yourself, am I thriving in my calling or constantly distracted? If you've set aside ministry work, creative projects, or spiritual development since entering the relationship, that's a signal worth reflecting on. Consider surrounding yourself with mentors or spiritual leaders who can help you realign with your purpose. Remember, God connects people who strengthen each other's mission, not those who dim it. And here's the truth. When God redirects you from a relationship, it's never to limit you, but to protect the greatness He's placed inside you. Purpose misalignment is a powerful sign, but there's another that often speaks even louder. The silence or confusion you experience in prayer when you're seeking God's guidance. When God does not want you to be with someone, prayer often becomes clouded with confusion instead of clarity. You may find yourself praying for guidance but leaving with more questions than answers. Philippians 4:6-7 speaks of a peace that surpasses understanding. Yet when a relationship isn't aligned with God's will, that peace seems out of reach. You might feel like you're trying to force a yes from God when deep down, He's gently saying no. This spiritual fog isn't random. It's often a sign to pause and reflect. Imagine calling a friend for advice, but every time they answer, there's static, making it hard to hear their voice. That's how unclear prayer can feel when you're asking God about a relationship that isn't His best for you. The more you seek clarity, the more restless you feel. Maybe you've asked for signs, yet the discomfort lingers. When God does not want you to be with someone, He may withhold the peace you're seeking, not out of cruelty, but to redirect you towards something greater. So, how do you break through that clouded space? Start by praying for alignment rather than outcomes, asking God to reveal His will, not just to confirm what you hope for. Consider journaling your prayers and noting how you feel afterward. Are you peaceful or still conflicted? Another practical step. Fast from the relationship for a few days and focus purely on seeking God. When clarity is absent, it often points to God gently closing a door. And here's the thing, when clarity feels distant, God isn't ignoring you. He's guiding you toward deeper trust, even when His answer feels uncomfortable. Lack of peace in prayer isn't meant to leave you stuck in doubt, but to reveal a deeper truth. Sometimes the relationship you're holding on to is quietly pulling you away from the very community God designed to strengthen you. When God does not want you to be with someone, the relationship often creates a subtle but significant distance from spiritual community. Hebrews 10:25 emphasizes the importance of gathering with other believers. Yet an unhealthy relationship can quietly pull you away from that essential support. Maybe you've noticed you're skipping church more often, drifting from Bible study groups, or avoiding accountability conversations. Relationships aligned with God's plan bring people closer to Him and His body, not further away. Think about it. When was the last time you felt truly connected to your faith community? Imagine a shepherd intentionally separating a sheep from the flock. It becomes vulnerable, exposed, and easier to lose direction. The enemy often uses isolation as a tactic to weaken believers. And when God does not want you to be with someone, you might feel this relational drift in ways you can't quite explain. If you're constantly defending the relationship or feeling ashamed to share details with spiritually grounded friends, that's a red flag worth exploring. A practical way to identify this is by asking yourself, am I being drawn closer to God's people or further away? Consider re-engaging with a faith-based community activity you once enjoyed, whether that's a prayer group, a worship night, or volunteering at church. Reflect on how your spirit responds. Does reconnecting bring peace, or does it create tension with your partner? When God does not want you to be with someone, He often allows this discomfort to reveal the need for spiritual realignment. But remember, isolation doesn't just affect community, it can compromise something even deeper, your personal identity. A healthy relationship should reflect God's truth about who you are, not force you to change the essence of your faith. And when you're asked to shrink your identity just to maintain peace, it may be a sign you're walking outside of God's will. When God does not want you to be with someone, your personal identity often gets diluted in ways you never imagined. Ephesians 2:10 reminds us that we are God's workmanship, created with purpose and unique design. Yet an unhealthy relationship can subtly pressure you to shrink parts of who you are, your faith, your values, your voice, just to avoid conflict or gain acceptance. You might feel like you're walking on eggshells, carefully curating yourself to fit a version your partner prefers, rather than living in the fullness of how God created you. Think about it. Have you ever caught yourself holding back from sharing your beliefs because you feared it would rock the boat? Maybe you've stopped mentioning your spiritual goals, softened your convictions, or even laughed along with things that once made you uncomfortable. It's like dimming your light when you were created to shine. When God does not want you to be with someone, He often reveals this erosion of self as a sign you're drifting from His design for your life. A practical way to assess this is to reflect on how much of you has changed since entering the relationship. Are you compromising on core beliefs? Have you stopped speaking up for what you know is right? Try writing down a list of personal values and comparing them to how you live now. If your identity feels blurred, consider seeking wise counsel from spiritual mentors who can help you realign with God's truth. Remember, healthy relationships should empower, not diminish, who God created you to be. But here's the truth. Compromised identity is never what God intends. He created you to be bold, authentic, and fully aligned with His purpose. And when God does not want you to be with someone, He often allows that discomfort to prepare you for something better. Because sometimes the hardest thing isn't letting go. It's trusting God's perfect timing, even when waiting feels uncomfortable. When God does not want you to be with someone, He often uses timing as a way to reveal His will. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, there is a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens. Yet, when emotions run high, waiting for God's perfect timing can feel like the hardest test of all. You may feel tempted to force a relationship that isn't unfolding naturally, believing that if you don't act now, you'll miss your chance at love. But God's delays are not His denials. They're often His divine protection. Imagine planting a seed and digging it up every day to check its progress. The constant interference would prevent the roots from forming properly. Relationships can be like that too. When God does not want you to be with someone, He may withhold peace and momentum, not because He's punishing you, but because the relationship isn't ready or right. Rushing ahead can lead to heartbreak, while trusting His timing ensures you're aligned with His perfect plan. A practical way to surrender to God's timing is through intentional patience. Instead of trying to make things happen, focus on your own spiritual growth. Dive deeper into Scripture. Strengthen your relationship with God and pursue your personal calling. Write down promises from the Bible that remind you of God's faithfulness, such as Proverbs 3:5-6, and meditate on them when impatience creeps in. Remember, waiting isn't passive, it's preparing your heart for what God has in store. And here's the beautiful truth: when God does not want you to be with someone, it's because He sees the entire picture, the things you can't yet see. Trusting His timing isn't about losing hope, it's about believing He has someone or something far better in store. But what if you're struggling to release the relationship, even when you sense God is saying no? Let's explore how to find peace when letting go feels impossible. You've seen the signs: loss of peace, misaligned values, spiritual stagnation, and the quiet but persistent voice urging you to let go. These aren't just random feelings. They're God's way of protecting you, redirecting you toward His best. The question is, will you trust Him? Or will you keep holding on to a relationship He's clearly asking you to release? What if the very thing you fear losing is the barrier keeping you from the blessings God has prepared? Imagine the peace of living fully aligned with His will, no longer second-guessing or wrestling with confusion. It starts with courage, the courage to surrender what you think you need and trust the one who knows your heart better than anyone. So, what step will you take today? Will you pray for clarity? Will you seek wise counsel? Or will you take the bold step of letting go? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced God nudging you away from a relationship? Your story could encourage someone else searching for answers. If this message resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video that could transform your spiritual journey. God's truth brings freedom. Let's keep discovering it together.